The $20 bill fluttered through the air before landing on Eleanor May Johnson's face. "Here," the bank manager sneered, leaning over her wheelchair. "Buy yourself some food and don't come back. This is a bank for serious customers, not charity cases." 57 people watched. 57 phones stayed in pockets, and one security camera recorded everything. Eleanor was 90 years old. Her floral dress was faded, her orthopedic shoes hadn't been in style since 1987, and she looked exactly like what Bradley Whitmore assumed, a confused elderly woman who wandered into the wrong building. What no one in that marble-floored lobby knew was that Eleanor May Johnson had spent 63 years waiting for this exact moment, and the $20 bill now resting on her lap would eventually hang in a frame on the wall of this very bank underneath 4 words, "Dignity has no price." First National Bank of Charleston had 2 entrances, and Eleanor had chosen the wrong one. The main entrance featured floor-to-ceiling glass doors that whispered open for customers in designer suits and imported watches. A concierge in a tailored vest offered sparkling water and guided them to private consultation rooms where the air smelled like leather and money. The side entrance, the one Eleanor had used, led to the general banking floor where ordinary people waited in ordinary lines for the privilege of accessing their own money. The velvet rope separating these 2 worlds wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. On one side, you were a valued client. On the other, you were a transaction to be processed. Eleanor had noticed the difference the moment she wheeled herself through the door. The security guard's eyes had swept over her, assessed her value at approximately 0, and dismissed her in the span of a single heartbeat. The teller had directed her to wait over there, with a wave toward plastic chairs that looked designed to discourage sitting. And Bradley Whitmore, regional vice president and branch manager, had glanced up from his glass-walled office, seen her, and immediately returned to his computer screen with the expression of a man who had spotted a cockroach but decided it wasn't worth the effort to step on. She had been sitting in that plastic chair for 47 minutes when Bradley finally emerged. "Mrs. Johnson, is it?" He didn't offer his hand. He didn't smile. He stood over her wheelchair with his arms crossed, projecting the particular kind of impatience that wealthy people reserve for those they consider beneath them. "My staff tells me you've been asking to check your balance for almost an hour. We're a very busy branch, as you can see. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our smaller locations. There's one on the east side that handles simpler transactions." Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that had seen 90 years of men exactly like this one. "I've been banking here for 63 years, young man. Since before you were born. Since before your daddy was born, probably. I just want to check my balance, that's all." Bradley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, our systems show no account under your name. Perhaps you're confused about which bank you use. It happens to people your age." He said the last word like it tasted bad. "Now I really must ask you to leave. You're making our other customers uncomfortable." Eleanor looked around the lobby. No one met her eyes. The business owners studied their phones. The young professionals examined their shoes. Even the elderly customers in the comfortable waiting area seemed to shrink into their chairs, grateful that Bradley's attention was focused on someone else. This was how it always worked. Make enough noise about one person and everyone else falls silent. Make an example of one and the rest learn their place. "I'm not confused," Eleanor said, calmly, refusing to shrink. "And I'm not leaving until someone checks my balance. I've been a customer at this bank longer than you've been alive, young man. I remember when this lobby had wooden floors instead of marble. I remember when there was a colored line and a white line, and I remember the day my husband made them take that sign down. So don't you dare tell me I don't belong here." Her voice had risen slightly, not shouting, but firm, with an authority that made several customers look up from their phones. Bradley's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by people he considered beneath him. Eleanor had been invisible for most of her life, and she had learned to use it as a weapon. She had been invisible in 1961 when she walked into this same bank as a young bride and was told that women couldn't open accounts without their husband's signature. She had been invisible in 1975 when she applied for a business loan and was laughed out of the building by a manager who said, "Colored girls don't run companies." She had been invisible in 1998 when her husband James died and the estate lawyers assumed she was the housekeeper, not the widow. Every time someone looked through her instead of at her, Eleanor had filed the moment away in her memory, adding it to a collection of slights that stretched back 9 decades. But invisibility had its advantages. When people didn't see you, they didn't guard themselves around you. They said things they shouldn't say. They did things they shouldn't do. They revealed who they really were because they assumed you didn't matter enough to notice. Eleanor had noticed plenty about Bradley Whitmore. She had noticed the way he treated elderly customers, rushing them through transactions, sighing at their questions, occasionally correcting their withdrawal amounts when he thought they were too confused to count. She had noticed the way he looked at people like her black old poor-looking, as if they were obstacles between him and his bonus. She had noticed how he removed James's portrait from the lobby and replaced it with abstract art that better reflected the bank's modern vision. She had noticed how the community programs James had established, the small business loans for minority entrepreneurs, the financial literacy classes for seniors, had been quietly discontinued as not cost-effective. For 26 years, Eleanor had watched from the shadows as everything James built was slowly dismantled by people who saw profit where he had seen community. She had stayed silent because that was what women of her generation did, especially black women, especially old black women, especially old black women who had learned that making noise usually just made things worse. But 3 weeks ago, an anonymous letter had arrived at her home and everything changed. The letter detailed 18 months of systematic theft from senior citizens' accounts, all of it traced back to this branch, all of it allegedly masterminded by a manager whose description matched Bradley Whitmore perfectly. The letter included account numbers, dates, amounts, evidence so detailed that it could only have come from someone inside the bank, someone who had seen enough, someone who couldn't stay silent anymore. The letter had been unsigned, but Eleanor had her suspicions about who sent it. A young teller named Marcus Thompson had been fired from this branch 6 months ago for insubordination, which, according to the Whisper network of Charleston's black community, actually meant asking too many questions about account discrepancies. Marcus was the grandson of Eleanor's best friend from church, a young man she had watched grow up from a curious child into a principled adult. She remembered his grandmother's pride when he got the job at First National. She remembered his grandmother's heartbreak when he was fired, and she remembered the conversation she'd had with him 3 months ago when he'd confided what he'd seen and why he couldn't stay silent. "Mrs. Johnson, they're stealing from old people," Marcus had said, his voice shaking with anger. "People like my grandma, people like you, they're taking advantage of confusion and shame and the fact that nobody believes us when we complain. I tried to report it internally and they fired me within a week. Said I was creating a hostile work environment. But I kept copies of everything. I have proof. I just need someone who can actually do something about it." Eleanor had taken his hand and promised that she would, but she needed to see it for herself first. She needed to look Bradley Whitmore in the eye and know with absolute certainty that he was the kind of man the evidence suggested, because once she made her move, there would be no going back. Marcus had found a new job at a credit union across town, but Eleanor suspected he hadn't forgotten what he'd seen, and neither had she. "I'm not confused," Eleanor said calmly, reaching into her worn handbag. "And I'm not leaving until someone checks my balance. Here's my account number." She handed Bradley a slip of paper yellowed with age, the numbers written in her husband's elegant handwriting. James opened this account in 1962, after the Civil Rights Act passed and they finally had to let us bank here like human beings. "Check that number, young man, then we'll see who's confused." Bradley Whitmore had built his career on reading people, and he was certain he had Eleanor figured out. She was a relic, a remnant of another era, who probably thought she still had money in an account that had been closed decades ago. These types came through occasionally elderly customers clinging to passbooks from banks that no longer existed, confused about which institution held their Social Security deposits, sometimes genuinely delusional about fortunes they'd never possessed. Bradley had developed a standard procedure for handling them: condescend, gently redirect, firmly remove, quickly. It usually worked within 10 minutes. But Eleanor wasn't leaving, and the other customers were starting to stare. "Fine," Bradley said through gritted teeth. He snatched the paper from her hand and marched toward the nearest teller station, not bothering to help her follow. "Jennifer, run this account number. Let's settle this so Mrs. Johnson can be on her way." He said her name like an insult, loading it with all the contempt he'd learned to hide in polite company. Jennifer Chen, a young teller who had been at the bank for only 3 months, began typing with the nervous energy of someone who sensed trouble but didn't understand its shape. Eleanor wheeled herself over, slowly, her chair creaking with each rotation. The lobby had gone quiet. 57 people, business owners, young professionals, a few retirees in the comfortable waiting area, were watching the scene unfold with the particular attention that humans pay to potential conflict. Most of them had already made their judgments. The old black woman was probably senile. The bank manager was probably right. This would be over soon. "Sir," Jennifer's voice wavered. "The system is showing. I'm not sure what this means. It says account frozen, contact headquarters. I've never seen this message before." Bradley's smile widened into something predatory. "There you go, Mrs. Johnson. Your account is frozen. Probably because it's been inactive for decades, or because you owe money, or because—" He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a stage whisper that carried across the silent lobby. "Because it never existed in the first place. Now, I've been very patient, but I must insist that you leave before I call security." "Wait." A voice cut through the tension. "Let me try something." A young man stepped forward from the line, Marcus Thompson, wearing the modest suit of a credit union employee, his First National Bank ID badge from 6 months ago still visible in his wallet when he pulled out his driver's license. Eleanor felt her heart skip. She hadn't expected him to be here. She hadn't asked him to come. But somehow, impossibly, the young man who had started all of this was standing in the same lobby where his career had ended, about to put himself at risk again. "I used to work here," Marcus said, addressing Jennifer while carefully avoiding Bradley's gaze. "That error message usually means the account has special flags, high-value accounts that need manager-level clearance to access. It's a security feature, not a freeze. If you enter your override code and check the account details—" "Absolutely not." Bradley stepped between Marcus and the teller station, his face flushing red. "You were terminated for cause, Mr. Thompson. You have no authority here, and if you don't leave immediately, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He turned to the security guard. "Derek, please escort this man out." But Derek didn't move. He was staring at his phone, where a notification had just appeared, the beginning of a live stream that would change everything. Someone in the lobby had started filming. Someone always did these days. The video went live on Instagram at 2:47 p.m. captioned, "Bank manager humiliating 90-year-old black woman at First National Charleston. This is insane." Within 5 minutes, it had 10,000 views. Within 10 minutes, 50,000. The comments erupted like a volcano. "OMG, he literally threw money at her face. This is disgusting, someone call corporate. Why isn't anyone helping her? I'm calling that bank right now. He's going to lose his job and I'm here for it. Wait, who's the young guy? He seems like he's trying to help." Former employee, there's definitely more to this story. Inside the bank, phones began buzzing. Customers checked their screens and gasped. The security guard, Derek, looked at Bradley with an expression that had shifted from loyalty to uncertainty. And Jennifer Chen, still standing at her teller station, quietly typed in her override code while everyone was distracted. "Mrs. Johnson," Jennifer said softly. Could you come here for a moment? Eleanor wheeled herself over, her heart pounding despite 90 years of practice at staying calm. She had planned for many scenarios, but she hadn't planned for this, a young stranger risking her job, a former employee appearing like a guardian angel, a digital crowd gathering to witness whatever came next. She looked at the screen. She saw the number. And for the first time in 63 years, Eleanor May Johnson allowed herself to smile. "Young lady," Eleanor said loud enough for the now silent lobby to hear, "would you please read that balance out loud?" Jennifer hesitated, looking at Bradley, who was still focused on removing Marcus from the building. Then she looked at the number on her screen. Her face went pale. "Ma'am, I think there must be a mistake. This says your current balance is..." She swallowed hard. $473 million. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then chaos erupted. "What?" Bradley spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. "That's impossible. Run it again. The system must be glitched. There's no way." He pushed Jennifer aside and stared at the screen, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and the first flickers of genuine fear. "This has to be an error. We don't have any accounts this large at this branch. I would know. I'm the regional vice president. I would know." The live stream had hit 200,000 viewers. Comments flooded faster than anyone could read. 400 million. I literally screamed. "He just pushed that girl, OMG. The old lady is a secret millionaire I cannot. Wait, she's a billionaire. Someone send this to corporate now. This man is about to have the worst day of his life. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, Bradley. The way he threw that $20 at her, karma is undefeated. I'm crying at work right now. My grandma would have loved this woman. Somebody get Eleanor a reality show." But beneath the jokes and the celebration, something else was happening. Other stories were emerging in the comments. "This happened to my mom too at her bank. They charged her $3,000 in fees she didn't understand. My grandfather lost his whole savings to something like this. Bank said it was routine maintenance charges. Why do they always target old people? This is literally a nationwide problem and nobody talks about it. My aunt tried to report suspicious charges and they told her she was confused. Elderly financial abuse is real and it's everywhere." The video wasn't just exposing Bradley Whitmore. It was exposing a system, a pattern of exploitation that stretched across banks, cities, states. People who had stayed silent for years were suddenly finding their voices emboldened by a 90-year-old woman in a wheelchair who had refused to disappear. Marcus stepped forward again, but this time, no one tried to stop him. "The system isn't glitched," he said quietly. "I know because I saw this account once before, 6 months ago. Right before I got fired for asking why a $473 million account had been flagged for dormancy review when it showed regular activity." He looked at Bradley with an expression of barely contained fury. "You told me it was above my pay grade. You told me to forget I ever saw it. And when I didn't forget, when I started asking questions about why 17 elderly customers had complained about missing funds from their accounts, you had me terminated." Bradley's face had gone from red to white. That's a lie. You were fired for incompetence, for violating customer privacy, for noticing that you were stealing from old people," Marcus finished, "for connecting the dots between the dormancy reviews and the money disappearing from seniors' accounts, for figuring out that you'd been skimming for 18 months, taking a little from each customer, over 75 betting that they'd be too confused to notice or too embarrassed to report it." The lobby had transformed into a courtroom with 57 witnesses serving as jury. Eleanor raised her hand slowly, and somehow that simple gesture silenced everything. "Young man," she said, addressing Bradley with a voice that carried the weight of 9 decades. "You asked me earlier if I was confused about which bank I use. Let me clear that up for you. I know exactly where I am. I've been banking at First National since 1962 when my husband James Johnson walked through those doors and demanded that they open an account for a black family. They didn't want to, but James had something they wanted more than their prejudice money. A lot of money from an invention patent that would eventually become standard in every automobile in America. She paused, letting the words settle. James Johnson. As in the Johnson in First National Bank of Charleston, founded 1959 by Harrison White and James Johnson. As in the man whose portrait hung in this lobby until someone, she looked pointedly at Bradley, had it moved to the basement 3 years ago because it didn't fit the modern aesthetic. As in my husband. My late husband, who left me his 34% ownership stake in this bank when he died in 1998. The live stream hit 500,000 viewers. The comments section broke. I knew it. She owns the bank, OMG. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Bradley is literally shaking LMAOOO. She's been playing chess while he was playing checkers. 34%. She's been letting him humiliate her this whole time, knowing she could end him. Queen behavior, honestly. I'm crying actual tears right now. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. You can't. I would have been informed if a major shareholder. You were informed? Eleanor said calmly. Every year, the board sends a courtesy notification to all branch managers listing major shareholders. My name has been on that list for 26 years. But why would you notice I'm just an old black woman? Invisible? Forgettable? Not worth remembering. She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the anonymous letter, the one detailing 18 months of theft, the one that had brought her here today. I didn't come to check my balance, Mr. Whitmore. I know exactly how much money I have. I came because 3 weeks ago someone sent me this. She held up the letter. A detailed accounting of every dollar you've stolen from elderly customers at this branch. 47 victims. $2.3 million total. All funneled through fake maintenance fees and dormancy charges that you invented and pocketed. Bradley lunged for the letter, but Derek, the security guard, stepped between them, no longer uncertain about whose side he was on. I wanted to see for myself, Eleanor continued. I wanted to know if the man running my husband's bank was really the kind of person who would steal from old people, who would throw money in a 90-year-old woman's face, who would humiliate someone for the crime of being poor and black and old in a space where he thought he was king. She smiled a small, sad smile that held no triumph. Now I know. The police arrived at 3:23 p.m., exactly 36 minutes after Eleanor wheeled herself through the side entrance. They came not because of the viral video, though, that was being watched by over 1 million people now, but because Eleanor had called them herself 3 weeks ago, when she first received Marcus's letter. She had presented the evidence to Detective Angela Morrison, a specialist in financial crimes, who had been building a case against Bradley Whitmore for 8 months, without enough evidence to move forward. Eleanor's testimony, combined with Marcus's documentation and the scene now playing out on every smartphone in America, was exactly what Morrison needed. Bradley Whitmore. Detective Morrison announced, approaching with 2 uniformed officers. You're under arrest for 47 counts of elder financial abuse, 18 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Bradley's expensive composure finally shattered completely. This is insane. I'm the regional vice president. I've worked here for 15 years. You can't just... He turned to Eleanor, desperation replacing arrogance. Mrs. Johnson, please. I didn't know who you were. If I had known, I never would have. I can explain everything. The fees were standard procedure. The documentation will show... The documentation, Detective Morrison interrupted, shows that you created fake fee categories that don't exist in any First National policy manual. It shows that you specifically targeted customers over 75 betting that they would be too confused or too embarrassed to question charges they didn't understand. and it shows that $2.3 million in fees was transferred to a personal account in the Cayman Islands that you thought no one knew about." She held up a flash drive. "Your former employee, Mr. Thompson, was very thorough before you fired him." But Eleanor wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. "Detective Morrison," she said, "there's something else. Something I discovered when I reviewed my own account statements for the first time in 5 years." She pulled another document from her handbag, a thick stack of bank records annotated in red ink. Mr. Whitmore didn't just steal from small accounts. He got greedy. Over the past 18 months, he's been siphoning money from the dormancy fund, the account where inactive funds are held before being transferred to the state. But my account isn't dormant. It's the largest active account in this bank, and he's been taking from it too. She handed the documents to Detective Morrison. 17 unauthorized transfers, totaling $4.7 million, all disguised as administrative adjustments that he approved himself. Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her eyes were hard. "He didn't just steal from old people who couldn't fight back. He stole from me, from my husband's legacy, from the very bank James helped build." Bradley's face went gray. The difference between stealing from ordinary customers and stealing from a major shareholder was the difference between state charges and federal charges. The difference between years in prison and decades. That wasn't the adjustments were standard." His voice had become a whimper. "The adjustments," Eleanor said quietly, "were theft. And you made them because you assumed no one would ever check, because you assumed the old black woman who owned 34% of this bank was too invisible to notice." The handcuffs clicked around Bradley's wrists with a sound that echoed through the marble lobby. "You know what the funny part is?" Eleanor asked as officers led him toward the door. "That $20 you threw at me, that was exactly what my husband had in his pocket when he first walked into this bank in 1962. $20 and a dream. They told him he didn't belong here. They told him to try the colored bank across town. They told him a black man would never be welcome in a place like this." She picked up the crumpled $20 bill from her lap and smoothed it carefully. "James didn't leave. He stood right where I'm sitting now and demanded to be treated like a human being. He was so stubborn, so dignified, so absolutely certain of his own worth that they eventually gave in just to make him go away. And then he made them rich. He made this bank what it is today. And you—" She looked at Bradley with something that might have been pity. "You never even bothered to learn his name. The portrait was in the basement. The history was forgotten. The only thing that mattered to you was the money." She tucked the $20 bill into her handbag. "I'm keeping this. Someday, when this bank remembers who it's supposed to serve, I'm going to frame it and hang it in the lobby, right next to James's portrait. A reminder that dignity has no price tag, but disrespect has a cost." The live stream hit 3 million viewers. And in homes and offices across America, people who had felt invisible their whole lives watched a 90-year-old woman in a wheelchair teach a lesson that would echo for generations. The trial of Bradley Whitmore lasted 6 weeks and dominated financial news coverage. Prosecutors presented evidence of 47 victims, all elderly, all targeted, specifically because Bradley believed they wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. The victims ranged in age from 72 to 94, and their stories were heartbreaking. Margaret Chen, 81, had lost $34,000 in maintenance fees that didn't exist money she had saved for her grandchildren's college education. William Harris, 78, had lost $52,000 and nearly lost his home when he couldn't make his property tax payments. Dorothy Williams, 89, had lost her entire savings of $23,000 and had been too ashamed to tell her family, convinced that she had somehow made a mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing, prosecutor Amanda Chen told the jury. He targeted people who were vulnerable, people who were isolated, people who were conditioned by a lifetime of discrimination to believe that they didn't deserve answers, didn't deserve respect, didn't deserve to question authority. He weaponized their humility against them. The stolen funds totaled $7.1 million, when including the unauthorized transfers from Eleanor's account and the dormancy fund. The defense tried everything, claiming the charges were standard practice, arguing that Eleanor had orchestrated an elaborate entrapment, even suggesting that Marcus Thompson had fabricated evidence out of revenge. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the confusion of elderly customers. They painted Eleanor as a vindictive billionaire who had set up an innocent man. They questioned Marcus's credibility, his motives, his character. None of it worked. The video had been seen by 15 million people. The public had already rendered its verdict. And when Eleanor took the stand, she demolished every defense argument with the quiet dignity that had defined her entire life. Mr. Whitmore's attorney suggested that I orchestrated this confrontation to entrap his client, Eleanor said, looking directly at the jury. Let me tell you what I orchestrated. I orchestrated getting out of bed at 6 a.m. even though my arthritis makes it painful to move. I orchestrated putting on my best dress and fixing my hair because my mama taught me that you show respect by how you present yourself. I orchestrated wheeling myself through a door that wasn't designed for wheelchairs, past a security guard who looked at me like I was trash to a plastic chair, where I sat for 47 minutes waiting for someone to acknowledge my existence. She paused, letting the words sink in. I didn't entrap Mr. Whitmore. I gave him the opportunity to show who he really was. And he showed everyone. Bradley Whitmore was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. The judge, a woman named Patricia Coleman, who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Eleanor, added something unusual to her sentencing remarks. Mr. Whitmore, you built your career on the assumption that certain people don't matter. The elderly, the poor, people of color. You treated them as obstacles, as nuisances, as prey. But the woman you threw that $20 at has more dignity in her wheelchair than you've shown in 15 years of management. I hope you spend your time in prison reflecting on what it means to truly see the people around you. The 47 victims were fully reimbursed within 90 days. First National Bank established a dedicated elder protection unit to monitor for signs of financial exploitation. And Marcus Thompson, the young man who had risked everything to expose the truth, was offered his job back with a promotion. He accepted on one condition. I want to run this branch, Marcus told the board of directors, which now included Eleanor as an active participant rather than a silent shareholder. I want to make sure that every person who walks through those doors, through both doors, is treated with respect. Whether they have $400 million or 400 cents. That's what Mr. Johnson would have wanted. That's what Mrs. Johnson deserves. And that's the only way I'll come back. The board agreed unanimously. Eleanor's first act as an engaged shareholder was to restore her husband's portrait to the lobby. The unveiling ceremony was held on what would have been James's 92nd birthday. Over 300 people attended, bank employees, community leaders, civil rights veterans who remembered the struggles of the 1960s and dozens of elderly customers who had been victims of Bradley's theft. Eleanor spoke for only 3 minutes, but her words echoed through the marble lobby like a prayer. My husband walked into this bank in 1962 with $20 and a dream, she said, looking up at James's restored portrait. They told him he didn't belong. They told him his money wasn't good enough. They told him that colored folks should bank with their own kind. He didn't leave. He didn't back down. He looked them in the eye and said, my money is the same color as yours. And then he made them rich. He made this bank what it is today. And for 60 years, I've watched and waited to see if anyone would remember who built these walls. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. For a while, I thought they'd forgotten. I thought James's legacy would disappear brick by brick, replaced by people who saw profit instead of community. But then something happened. A young man named Marcus Thompson decided that he couldn't stay silent. He risked his career, his reputation, everything he had built, because he believed that what was right mattered more than what was easy. And because of him, she looked at Marcus, who was standing in the front row with tears streaming down his face. We're here today, not to celebrate my money or my name, but to remember what this bank was supposed to be. a place where everyone belongs, where everyone matters, where dignity has no price tag. The portrait hung now in a place of honor directly across from the main entrance, impossible to miss. James Johnson, painted in 1985, looked out at the bank he had helped build with eyes that seemed to see everything, the history, the struggles, the progress, the work still to be done. Beneath the portrait, a new plaque read, James Johnson, 1932 to 1998, co-founder, First National Bank of Charleston. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be seen. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Using $10 million of her own money matched by a $15 million commitment from the bank, she established the James Johnson Elder Protection Fund, a nationwide initiative to combat financial exploitation of seniors. The fund provided free financial literacy education legal support for victims of elder fraud training for bank employees to recognize signs of exploitation and a 24-hour hotline for seniors who suspected they were being taken advantage of. Within 2 years, it had helped recover $23 million in stolen funds and prevented an estimated 400 cases of elder financial abuse. The fund also established the Marcus Thompson Fellowship, an annual award for bank employees who demonstrated exceptional integrity in protecting vulnerable customers. The first recipient was Jennifer Chen, the young teller who had entered her override code when no one was watching, who had chosen to stand with a stranger instead of her boss. She was now assistant branch manager, being trained by Marcus to eventually run a branch of her own. The $20 bill, as promised, was framed and hung in the lobby. It sat in a simple black frame, the crumpled bill smoothed, but still bearing the creases from when it had been thrown at Eleanor's face. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "This bill was thrown at Eleanor May Johnson by a bank manager who saw her age, her race, and her clothing and decided she had no value. She kept it as a reminder that dignity has no price tag, but disrespect has a cost." February 14th, 2024. Valentine's Day. The day Eleanor had chosen deliberately because James had proposed to her on Valentine's Day in 1959, promising that he would spend his life building something that would outlast both of them. The bank had been part of that promise, and now finally, it was living up to what James had envisioned. The video of Eleanor's confrontation with Bradley became one of the most watched clips of the year. It spawned think pieces about elder financial abuse investigations into similar practices at banks across the country and a congressional hearing on protections for vulnerable customers. 3 other bank managers were indicted based on patterns discovered during the First National investigation. A documentary filmmaker reached out to Eleanor about telling her story. She agreed on the condition that all profits go to the Elder Protection Fund. The documentary, titled Dignity Has No Price, won an Emmy and was credited with inspiring legislation in 7 states strengthening protections for elderly bank customers. The hashtag Eleanor May Johnson trended for 3 days after the trial verdict. People shared their own stories of being dismissed, humiliated, and exploited by institutions that were supposed to serve them. Elderly people, disabled people, people of color, poor people. Anyone who had ever been made to feel invisible found something to hold on to in Eleanor's story, the proof that sometimes, against all odds, dignity prevails. But the impact Eleanor treasured most couldn't be measured in dollars or headlines. 6 months after Bradley's conviction, an elderly black man walked into First National Bank of Charleston, wearing clothes that had seen better days, looking uncertain about whether he belonged. Marcus Thompson, now branch manager, met him personally at the door. "Welcome to First National, sir. How can we help you today?" The man, a retired postal worker named William, who had been afraid to enter a bank for 30 years after being humiliated at another institution, burst into tears. "I just wanted to check my balance," William said, "but I wasn't sure if—" Marcus guided him to a comfortable chair, brought him water, and personally helped him review his accounts. It took 2 hours. Marcus never once looked at his watch. When Eleanor heard the story later, she nodded slowly. "That's why we did it," she said. Not for the money, not for the headlines, for William, for every William out there who's been made to feel like they don't deserve to take up space. That's what James always said. The bank isn't the building, it's the people. And the people deserve to be seen. 3 years later, Eleanor May Johnson sat in the lobby of First National Bank of Charleston, watching customers come and go through both entrances, which were now identical. The bank had been completely redesigned since Bradley's conviction. Gone were the velvet ropes that separated important customers from ordinary ones. Gone were the plastic chairs and the condescending signage. In their place, comfortable seating for everyone, clear information displays in multiple languages, dedicated staff trained to assist customers with disabilities or language barriers. The VIP lounge had been converted into a community room that hosted free financial literacy workshops every Saturday. Eleanor came here every Wednesday afternoon not to conduct business, she had people for that, but to watch, to remember, to make sure that the bank James had helped build was finally becoming what he had always envisioned, a place where everyone mattered, regardless of what they looked like or how much money they had. She was 93 now, still sharp, still formidable, still wearing the same kind of floral dresses she'd worn her whole life. The wheelchair had been upgraded, a gift from Marcus, who insisted that the woman who owned a third of the bank shouldn't be rolling around in something that creaked. But otherwise, she looked exactly as she had on the day that changed everything. Invisible to those who didn't know to look. Unforgettable to those who did. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, walked up to her with the fearless curiosity of childhood. She had brown skin and bright eyes and the kind of energy that made Eleanor smile despite her aching joints. "Are you the lady from the video?" the girl asked. "My grandma showed me. She said you're a hero." Eleanor smiled. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just an old woman who got tired of being invisible." "But you made the bad man go to jail. And you helped all those old people get their money back. And my grandma said you proved that just because someone looks poor doesn't mean they don't matter." The girl's eyes were wide with admiration. "That sounds like a hero to me." Eleanor reached out and took the girl's hand. "You know what my husband used to say? He said that the measure of a society isn't how it treats its most powerful members, it's how it treats its most vulnerable. The young, the old, the poor, the different. Anyone can be kind to people who can do something for them. The real test is whether you're kind to people who can't." She looked around the lobby at the portrait of James watching over them at the framed $20 bill at Marcus, helping an elderly couple navigate the ATM, at the security guard Derek, who had kept his job after testifying against Bradley opening the door for a woman with a walker. "I spent 90 years watching people decide who mattered and who didn't, based on what they saw on the outside. But here's what I learned. Sweetheart, everyone matters. Everyone deserves to be seen. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be invisible." The girl's grandmother appeared, apologizing for the interruption, ushering her daughter away with promises of ice cream. But at the door, the little girl turned back and waved at Eleanor with a smile that could light up a room. Eleanor waved back. And for a moment, she could almost see James beside her, grinning that grin that had made her fall in love with him 64 years ago, whispering the words he'd said when they'd first fought their way into this bank. "We did it, Ellie. We really did it." "We did it," Eleanor whispered back. "But we're not done yet." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a stack of papers, proposals for expanding the Elder Protection Fund plans, for a financial literacy program in underserved schools, blueprints for a community center that would bear James's name. At 93, most people would have considered their life's work complete. Eleanor was just getting started. She thought about all the years she had spent invisible, watching, waiting, gathering strength. For a moment, she wasn't sure would ever come. She thought about James, who had fought his whole life to be seen as a man, not a color. She thought about Marcus, who had risked everything to expose the truth. She thought about Jennifer, who had entered her override code when no one was watching. She thought about William, the elderly man who had wept with relief when someone finally treated him with respect. all of them invisible in their own ways, choosing to be seen. That was the real victory Eleanor realized. Not the money, not the conviction, not the headlines or the documentary or the legislation. The real victory was this proving that invisible people have power, that dignity cannot be bought or sold, that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything, because dignity has no price tag. But legacy costs everything you have, and Eleanor May Johnson had decided 63 years ago that she was willing to pay.